Hey, I'm Chris Broussard, and I am joined today by one of the all-time great players, a good friend of mine, and really was a guy that I looked up to growing up. He's a little bit older than me, so I watched him play. But you'll recognize him. He is one of the best point guards to ever play the game, best players, period. The Hall of Famer Isiah Thomas. And we're continuing, we're going to talk about Isiah, but also get into some stuff with The Last Dance from the Michael Jordan Chicago Bulls documentary that debuted last night on Sunday, April 19th. And Isiah was one of the guys that beat Jordan quite a bit. So I'm sure he'll have a lot to say about that. Isiah, welcome, man. How are you?
I am great. How you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good.
And I thank you for
joining me. Yeah. I don't know if I ever told you this, but first time, I didn't meet you this time, but the first time I really encountered you in person was at a Bobby Knight basketball camp. I was in 6th grade, and you had just finished your freshman year.
Right.
And you came and talked to the campers and stuff like that. So I remember that vividly.
He used to have some great camps, and he had kids from all over. I mean, and I think he used to run a camp, and it seemed like he had 1,000 kids every week. I mean, it was quite a good camp that he used to put on.
He did, because I was living in Indianapolis at the time. I was going into 7th grade, and so I was with the younger kids, but he had top high school players there, and it was great because every night we would watch like a film, like we watched like a documentary or something about some great players. And he would break down a lot of stuff for us. So it was really good. It was really good. But I want to, before we get to The Last Dance, I want to talk about you because I did a video last week. I do a series called You Kids Just Don't Know. You know, how great certain players were from the bygone eras because, you know, these millennials think that the game was just invented in 2000 or 1995 or something like that. And do you feel like, I don't want you to toot your own horn, but do you feel like a lot of times people don't really understand, you get underestimated, let's put it that way, because I remember a year or two ago, Bleacher Report put out their top 50 players, and I don't know if you saw it, you probably saw it, they had you like 47th or something. I mean, it was ridiculous. Do you feel like you do get underestimated?
You know, it's interesting. I feel like I'm underestimated depending on the criteria of evaluation, and it's get pretty complicated because you have so many people doing analytics with their own formulas and their own criteria, and that formula or criteria of their measurements can either eliminate you totally or discredit any of your winning that you've done. So if you're going to talk about me and say winning championships don't matter, that don't count, and you're going to discount that, and if you're going to judge me based on the formula of the criteria for the big men that dominated in the 80s. The big men were dominated by, you know, the Wilt Chamberlains, the Kareems, the Bill Russells, the Moses Malones, the Dr. J's, the Larry Birds, the Magic Johnsons, you know, everybody that was 6'6" and above. The formula of criteria measurement for winning, it really favored them. For small guys such as myself, I made the decision that this formula that they're evaluating and judging people on, I can't win that way. The only way for me to win is to go by another formula of criteria for success for me in the Detroit Pistons. And therefore, that's how we won and dominated. But if you're trying to use the formula that they use today, it actually, you know, discredits or eliminates a lot of my success.
Right.
And I know that was long-winded, and I'm sorry it's so complicated.
No.
That's the only way of explaining it and understanding it.
Well, you were like a precursor to, I mean, today's there is obviously dominated by guards and small forwards. And you were kind of a precursor to that. I say Tiny Archibald, and you know, he didn't have the longevity that you had. But, you know, you guys were high-scoring point guards, best players on your teams, and that's what we see today with a lot of the point guards.
Yeah.
One thing I think millennials do underestimate as well is the quality of play during the 80s. And I know we all know how different the game is with the three-point shot and the big men in your era and not so much in this era. How do you compare, though, the quality of play, if you can? I know it's hard because the games are so different, but
Yeah.
I think the quality was still great back then.
Yeah, they're drastically different games. Really, it's like apples and oranges today in terms of when you talk about comparisons of play, that you're really talking about offensive schemes and defensive schemes. And no two teams really played alike. So the offensive schemes and the defensive schemes, the way we played was drastically different than the way the Celtics played. And the Celtics played drastically different than the Lakers. And the 76ers played drastically different than anybody. So everybody had their own different kind of styles. And it's just like boxing, right? The styles make the fight, right? Well, all of us played different. And when you look at the 80s where, you know, Magic was a great player, Bird was a great player, Jordan was a great player, Dr. J was a great player, I was a great player. None of us played similar.
Right.
We all played differently. and
right.
and the originality of your play and your style competing against somebody else's originality in their display and style, that's what made it interesting. And then you had one team played fast, one team played slow. So the contrasting styles and the mental aptitude that you had to bring to that to really beat the other team, that made the chess game, the physical game, that put it all into play, and it was all on display. What we have today is that everyone plays the same style, everyone has the same shot, everyone is, you know, there's no uniqueness,
Right.
you know, there's no originality, you know, that now they're all wildly skilled and creative, and they're much better athletes than we were at that time, but they all really play the same way. Everyone shoots the three, make the layup, or the free throw. That's the only scheme that they play, that they are confined to play in. So all originality and creativity and mental stamina had to be more rigorous than it is today.
Who was the toughest?
Sorry again for being long like that. I know it. I know it gets lost sometimes, but that's the only way I know how to explain it.
It was good because, I mean, today, as you said, three-point shot, layup, free throw, high pick and roll everywhere. They hardly ran high pick and rolls during the 80s, right?
Yeah, we were unique. We were one of the first teams to start playing that way, and that's what made our style so different than the Lakers. The Lakers, the Celtics, they were inside dominant teams, and the contrast in style was, could a jump shooting team with a small point guard and a small shooting guard backed up by another small shooting guard coming off the bench, can these three guards play and win a championship with a center that shot from the top of the key and the three-point line? Could they beat a low post offense? I mean, and that was the interesting thing. And you had to be, your mental stamina had to be good enough to outmaneuver, outthink the Birds, the Magics, the Kareems, the Moses, the Dr. J's, and to stay within your confines of how you win and not get sucked into how they win.
You, as we'll get into, I mean, you beat Michael Jordan a lot. You beat him 3 years straight in the playoffs. I think you and Bill Laimbeer have beaten him more in the regular season than any players ever. And
we're proud of that.
I know. Who was and maybe it was him, but who did you feel like just throughout the course of your career was the toughest player you went against, whether you guarded him or just he was on the other team? who was kind of the toughest guy for you that you felt you faced?
So individually, the guy who gave me the most problems, and I've been on record saying this, was Michael Ray Richardson. And people don't remember, how dominant a player for that 2-3 year period of time that the Sugar Man was. I mean, Michael Ray Richardson, he gave me all kinds of problems because A, he was bigger than me. B, he was tough. He could shoot the three. He could put it on the floor. He could post you up. And then he had mental stamina, so you couldn't wear him down during the course of the game. From an overall standpoint, team standpoint, Dr. J's teams were, off the chart smart. Larry Bird's teams were off the chart smart. And Magic Johnson teams were off the chart smart. So you just couldn't come to a basketball game and be like, hey, look, I run faster than you. I jump higher than you. I'm going to score 40 points on you and win the game. That you can do all that, but you're going to lose, right? You really had to come to the game.
Which Jordan saw.
Yeah, and that's what we saw last night in the doc, right? And Bird was cool about the way he said. He was like, yeah, he was God in gym shoes, and he scored 63 points and 49 points. Oh, but by the way, we won the series 3-0.
Right.
I mean, and that's how they were back then. It was just so matter of fact about it. It was like, oh yeah, you can score, you can do all that, but can you win? And that's the difference. You can be individual in doing it, or can you figure out the geometry, the chemistry of a team and how it works and the organization, and can you put all that together to become a champion? That's what I was about.
One thing we saw last night, and I think it'll get into it more going forward, is Jordan, the way he led, tough on teammates, berating guys, holding everybody to a high standard. You were a tough leader as well. We heard about, your fight with Bill Laimbeer, maybe other teammates. What was your pattern of leadership? There's all different styles. LeBron leads a certain way. Jordan led. What was your way of leading?
Definitely different styles of leadership. And my style of leadership, I've always said I try to inspire and try to get the best out of all of us to achieve one goal. Being a small person, even though I could fight, I wasn't like trying to fight or be demanding or commanding. Leadership is given, it's not taken. And you have to build trust within your teammates. And then we have to commit to a goal. And my job was to inspire everyone to get to this common goal of winning. And watching the documentary, definitely Jordan's leadership style is definitely different than mine.
Well, as I said earlier, you guys were beating them in the playoffs every year. What was your view? We look back now, and a lot of people call Jordan the GOAT. We look back now as if almost thinking everything revolved around him, and the Pistons were beating the Bulls. Wow, how'd they do that? What was your guys' attitude toward them? Were they just the little brothers, not a big deal? You had bigger fish to fry, or what was it?
Honestly, we had bigger fish to fry. I mean, when you got to remember my perspective, and I'm just talking from my perspective. It was Dr. J, Moses Malone, and the Philadelphia 76ers. Okay, and then after that, it was Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, and the Boston Celtics. And then after that, it was Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Those were the guys. And we were trying to beat and catch them. So that 86 Celtic team that people say is the greatest team to ever play, right? Well, guess what? In 87, the Detroit Pistons had them beat. I throw the ball away in game 5. right?
Yep.
And in game 7 in 87, Vinnie Johnson and Adrian Dantley collide heads, and we lose in a game 7 in Boston by 3 points. That's how good a basketball team we were during the 80s. And as you pointed out, we didn't have, top 50 players and all this other stuff, but what we were able to do quickly, and because of leadership and everything else, we were able to come together and work as a team. And while people described us as physically tough, if you go back and you read any of the articles, we always described and defined ourselves as mentally tough. We said we were a mentally tough team and a tough-minded team. That's how we defined and described ourselves.
You've told me how you learned you would go to the Celtics, but when they were going deeper than you guys in the playoffs, you would go to their games, you would be in their locker room after they'd won and soaking it all up. Same thing with the Lakers. You were very close with Magic, close with Kevin McHale. Is there a misnomer today? Because everybody today looks at LeBron being close with guys and says, oh, they soft. Back in the 80s, they hated each other and, nobody was friends. And we even saw last night, Jordan and Danny Ainge went golfing during the playoffs.
I'm sure that blew people's mind.
Right. I mean, were guys friends then? And is that overblown that everybody hated each other and all that stuff?
It's totally overblown, and it's a narrative that was perpetuated in the media to create interest, sell newspapers, so forth and so on. Now, again, I come into a league where I can distinctly remember Bill Russell saying that he would invite Wilt Chamberlain to his house, and they would have dinner and they would talk, and then they would play, right? And Kareem invited me to his house, competing against the Lakers in the finals, and Magic and I were real close. Now, we all understood back then that the sharing of information makes the game better. How do we compete? How do we make this game better? How do I get better? What skill you got, so forth and so on. And that was the collective thought in terms of moving the game to where it's at today globally. How do we keep getting better, moving up the ladder? So when I got into the league, I wanted to know how to win, how to be a champion. I just didn't want to be a regular player in the league. So yeah, I went and I studied the Boston Celtics and the Philadelphia 76ers in the LA Lakers. Those were the 3 champions at that time, and we became the 4th during that period in the 80s. And Dr. J, Kevin McHale, and Magic Johnson, they allowed me to be in their inner circle and allowed me to watch and allowed me to learn. And I can remember the Boston Celtics winning the championship, and they're pouring champagne in their locker room, and DJ and also McHale look up over at me and like, what the hell are you doing in here? You know what I'm doing. I'm taking notes. So, when the Lakers won, I'm in their locker room. And by the way, when the Lakers lost in Boston, I remember being at their exit meeting and Pat Riley talking to them about how they're going to come back in I think it was 87 and win championships, so forth and so on. Or I'm sorry, it's 85. That they were going to come back and win and be better. And
so you were in the locker room or wherever it was in the meeting?
I was at their exit meetings, not in the locker room because they didn't have it in the locker room. They had it at some.
So this is like a day or two after.
Yeah, after the season, and I'm with Magic, watching Magic go through those hard times, not just the good times, because there were hard times too. Mm-hmm. I was there when Gerald Henderson stole the ball from James Worthy on an inbound pass, which I came back and made the same mistake, and I watched James Worthy get up and get better. Okay. I watched Magic Johnson dribble out the shot clock in the Boston Garden, and everybody calling him Tragic Johnson. I was with him that next summer to see him grow, to see him get better. So learning from all of these ups and downs made me a much better player.
That's interesting. In the late 80s, they probably wish they hadn't taught you all that stuff.
It's interesting. you know, I think they're glad that they taught me, because the way we went on and won, and it's lesson learned. It's kind of like, the master teaching the teaching the student. And then when the student beats the master, that's why you hear, whenever I talk about the Celtics or the Lakers, whenever the Pistons talk about the Celtics or the Lakers, we hold them in high esteem, because they taught us, and we were good students, but at the same time, we were learning from the masters. And you've never heard us disrespect them in any kind of way.
Well, that's interesting you bring that up, because you're right about the way you guys talk about each other, the Lakers, Celtics, Pistons. We don't hear the Bulls, and we'll see what we'll see in episodes 3 and 4. But they don't talk about you guys in that light as, man, they taught us, if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't. I think they have mentioned, like Jordan said, he had to start lifting weights to beat y'all and stuff like that and toughen up. But why do you think it doesn't seem to be the same reverence for you guys, the Pistons, as you guys have for the teams that you had to eventually overcome?
That I don't know. And I think that's a question that you would have to ask them, and they would have to answer that themselves. And I do know, some people talk about, well, we were rough and everything else. Well, I can go back and show you that, hey, I got hit just as hard as Jordan got hit. I got as many bloody eyes and I don't think he ever got bloody eyes. I got bloody eyes and I got wounds. Okay, but they just didn't come from the Chicago Bulls. They came from the Celtics too. They came from the Philadelphias. They came from the Milwaukees. I mean, everybody played rough at that time, and to some extent. If you go and you look at Boston, LA's 30 for 30. When you watch Boston, LA's 30 for 30, you talk about rough, you talking about, trash talking and so forth and so on. And then when you go back further, hey, I'm watching Dr. J and Larry Bird physically go boom, boom, boom to each other. But the level of respect that everybody still has for each other, that's just the way it was. Now, I don't know why Chicago doesn't feel that way, but that's I guess that's their journey and their story to tell. The Pistons, we tell a story of respect and gratitude of the Lakers and the Celtics for being such good teachers, and also being great champions, because they were.
Mythology says you guys had these Jordan rules. And the myth is it was just basically beat him up. Whenever he got in the lane, you're hammering him. Tell us, were there Jordan rules, and what were they?
Yeah, so they were called Jordan rules, but they're defensive rules. They were about defense. And at that time, you wasn't going to give away your game plan or your formulas of how you're defending and stopping someone. So yeah, they called them Jordan rules, but the way it was, what I figured out is that Jordan wasn't as good going left as he was right. And that's like no big revelation. However, but the way they were playing, their offensive scheme allowed us to force him left, double team him from the baseline. And consequently, when he became a passer, and he was a reluctant passer, he wasn't a great passer with his left hand. He was right hand dominant. So we would keep pressure on the right side to force that pass to be up in the air and not a direct line drive pass. If we can make that pass up in the air, then it gave us enough time to rotate defensively to get back and help and recover. And those were simply the rules. If he was on the right wing, force him to the middle because he was coming left. If he was on the right wing, force him left to the baseline, come over and trap. If he was in the middle of the floor, and from a basketball perspective, the middle of the floor is the most dangerous place to be. So that's why when you're taught as a point guard, you have to knock that offensive player out of the middle of the floor, because if he is in the middle of the floor, which I was able to operate in, then you can see right, you can see left. But if I can shade you to one side or the other, then I take away 90% of the floor. And that's what we were able to do to him successfully. Those were our rules. Now, we were disciplined enough on every single play to follow the rules. So our mental stamina, our mental understanding, 1 through 12, whoever came into the game, that's what made us so good. And that's why we talked about our mental toughness while everyone else talked about our physical toughness.
This is some basketball 101 right here.
I'm sorry to be doing it like this, but I
No,
apologize. This is the only way I can talk about it.
Yeah, this is great stuff. A lot has been made, Isaiah, and you know this, about there's this beef between you and Michael Jordan. Like, he doesn't like Isaiah and this and that. What is your notion of the relationship? I mean, you've seen Jordan, you've encountered him. What do you feel that there's something there?
I've never felt that from him energy-wise, and I've been to dinner with him. I've coached him in an All-Star game. I've seen him out publicly, and my son had a Jordan jersey in his bedroom. I've never experienced any animosity or hostility from him in any of the settings that we've ever been in. As a matter of fact, it's been just the opposite. It's been respectful, gracious, and and when he got to Chicago, we definitely communicated. Now, people want to make this beef between he and I have never seen or heard where Michael Jordan has said anything negative about me as a person. And all I can do is go by his word. Now, I've heard where other people have said, well, Michael said this, or Michael said this, or Michael, hey, Michael's a grown man, and he can speak for himself. And until I hear directly out of Michael Jordan's mouth, that's what I'm going to go by. Now, I grew up on the west side of Chicago, and I know how people will spit poison in one ear so you can go and react and do something, that somebody else has fed you some bad information. So I don't play by those rules until I hear from this person himself. You can't tell me nothing about what this guy supposedly thinks, because the way he treats me and the way he acts around me, that's what I'm going to go by.
One of the stories out there, the myths, is, of course, the freeze out in the 1985 All-Star game. He was a rookie. And I remember at that time, I went back and read some articles, and he was 2 for 9 from the floor with 7 points.
Yeah.
So people, the legend is that Isaiah told everybody, look, don't pass to Jordan, blah, blah, blah. Jordan, to your point, he never said that. In the articles, he actually said, I was a rookie. I was tentative. I was, I didn't want to come out and step on veterans' toes. And he said that I thought Isaiah actually played it right. He was quoted as saying that in the newspaper. Other stuff that came out, rumors, I don't know, what the truth was, but was that veterans thought he was arrogant. They thought he was cocky. I guess he did the dunk contest with gold chains on, and that rubbed guys the wrong way. Even George Gervin did say he's a rookie. He got to learn like everybody else did. So what was if you can remember what it was like back in 85, whether it was in the locker room, whether it was just around that weekend, I know it wasn't like it is today, but was there animosity toward Jordan, or any of that stuff? Okay, so
let's really set the scene, the real scene, not the make-believe scene, not the Disney World fantasy scene. 1985, right? I have zero voice in the locker room. Michael Jordan has zero voice in the locker room. The main guys in the NBA at that time, 1985, Dr. J, Moses Malone, Kareem, Magic, Bird. That was it. And so this is the picture they've tried to create over the years, is that Isiah Thomas walked in and said to Dr. J, to Larry Bird, and to Moses Malone, and everybody else who was in that room that, hey, we're going to do something to Jordan. And they said, hey, Isiah, yeah, man, you're right. I'm going to follow you. Yeah, I like you, man. You're right. Come on. I mean, let's be real. And I always thought it was comical that, and I'm sure Jordan probably thought it was comical too, because once you are in that room, and Chris, you've been around a lot of these guys. Hey man, when they walk in and they are the top dogs, they let you know they the top dogs. And in 1985, we could barely get a handshake from one of those guys. But I can tell you what really impressed me though in any of those all-star matchups. As I talked to you, as we talked earlier about Larry Bird and Dr. J, how they was fighting and going back and forth. And the Boston-Philly rivalry was bigger than any rivalry at that time in basketball in the East. And seeing Dr. J and Larry Bird, the respect that both of those guys have for each other. Because you know I'm little in the locker room, and I'm waiting to see how they gonna respond. Right. And they walk in, they dap, they give each other a hug, and they talk, and I'm like, hey, I just saw y'all fighting last week. Hey, and it wasn't none of that. And that's how we learn as Pistons, like, okay, you can compete, you can play hard, you can be physical and all this other stuff, but at the end of the day, when you walk away from the court, that's it. And that's how we played.
Wow, that's great. You guys, another big story in the Pistons Bulls rivalry is you guys, when they finally beat you guys in '91 in the Eastern Conference Finals, you guys walked off the court with, less than a minute left, or before the game was over. You walked by their bench to the locker room, and they were offended, and supposedly that was a huge deal. And I'm gonna say this, and I know obviously you'll expound on it. When you guys finally beat Boston, which had beaten you in this playoffs of several years, in '88, right? Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, all their stars, they walked off the court into the locker room with more time left in the game. Never congratulated you, never, I think you and McHale did because y'all were cool, but you know what I mean? So talk about that. And when you guys walked off, was it like, man, these dudes ain't legit, we disrespecting them? Or was it, that's the way it was back then? And tell me about that.
No, that's how it was. You when you got beat, you left. That was it, and the other team celebrated, and now when we beat Boston, the game was still going on. They took out their starters, and then their starters were leaving the court. And Bird walked to the locker room, and McHale and I had known each other since high school, and he was actually walking by me, and I grabbed him, we shook hands, and he gave me the message, hey, go beat LA. But really, that was it. Now, we never said, and we're just bringing it up kind of now, just in terms of retrospect, but we never said, oh, the Celtics walked off the court on us and they were bad champions, and Larry Bird's this, and that. We never said that. It was kind of like, okay, they lost, they left, and it was over. Now, what happened with Detroit and Chicago when we walked off, I think any of us right now, looking back over the years, had we known that the media would make a big deal about it the way they did, all of us, including me, we would have stopped, shook hands, hugged, kissed each other. Hey man, congratulations, yeah. Who the hell wants to pay this price, right? 30 years later, 30 years later, this is what you're talking about. I mean, and I think from that point on, that's why you see everybody now. And Chris, you can go back in your memory bank, and I want you to watch any of those NBA finals that you saw. Okay, well, nobody like Shea. You lost and you left, and everybody. But now everybody makes sure, because of the ass whooping that we took in the media and still taking for 30 years, right? You know, everybody stops down and be like, hey, 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 my man, I love you. Good luck, dude. don't talk about me. Don't say I didn't do it. But hey,
but it's interesting because it does seem like as in narratives and stuff, and you and I were talking earlier, and the trailer for episode 3 of The Last Dance has come out, and they quote you, saying we were like crashing the party. When we came along, it was like we were crashing the party. And the context in which it's set, it looks like you're saying, man, when we beat the Bulls in Jordan, it was like we crashed the party and we messed it up for everybody. But that wasn't the context of your quote.
No. So the context of my quote was, we were crashing a party of the Lakers and the Celtics. The Bulls at that time had not won anything, so we couldn't be crashing their party. And the way, and what I've learned and what we all was fighting during that period of time and still fighting today is how people can take pictures and words, put them together, and make a narrative, sometimes true, sometimes false. And the narrative around the Detroit Pistons from pictures and a couple of words is completely false. I mean, you would think like we didn't score, we were just fouling people and everything else. That's not how we played. But by the way, we played no different than the way the Celtics, the Lakers, the 76ers, and the Chicago Bulls, who all of a sudden gets Rodman, right? Rodman, Sally, Edwards, they're thugs with Detroit.
That's right.
Rodman, Sally, Edwards with the Chicago Bulls. I always call them the Detroit Bulls because they were half the Detroit Bulls.
Right.
Those three now, they're angelic. And it's interesting. But if you go back and you look at the 80s, we were one of the highest scoring teams in the 80s. We have the highest scoring game still ever played against the Denver Nuggets. So when you talk about who we were as a basketball team, the narrative around us is so skewed and is so misleading that it's just not accurate. It's just not accurate at all.
In my years of just being a fan of the game, there's two things that really bother me, just as a fan and a guy that obviously now covers and analyzes the game. The first was Dr. J and the Sixers losing to the Portland in 77 in the finals, because they were up, you remember, they were up 2-0. Yep. And I just think, Doc's legacy is obviously great, but it would be even greater had they won that championship against Portland. The second thing is you being left off the Dream Team in 92, which everybody knows you were one of the best players in the world. You should have been on that team. How much did that bother you at that time, and does it even still bother you to this day?
Yeah, it hurt. I mean, it really ugh. I had never. I thought I had done everything to deserve to be on the team, and the criteria that they had put out in terms of the criteria of measurement, in terms of who they were selecting to be on the team. A, you had to be a champion. B, what you had done for the league. And C, then they were going to fill around with other people. Well, from that criteria, I thought that I would definitely be on the team because that was Jordan's first championship. I had already won 2. I think Magic had, 4 or 5. Bird had 3. So, I thought, okay, I'm safe. you know.
Right.
And when I wasn't selected, yeah, that hurt. It was painful, and it was painful for a while, and then I had to get over it, and I rooted for the USA. I watched every game. I watched the Dream Team play, and I was happy when they won the gold medal. Now I go back to my upbringing, Chris, and I say, there have been so many times that I've in my life. I have not had an easy life in terms of growing up. So, was this the biggest disappointment in my life? No. But was it a disappointment? Yes. But my life from ages 1 through 20, I've had so many disappointing things happen to me just growing up on the west side of Chicago. So I think I was able to internalize and live with that experience and not make it as big as the world has made it. But in the world of sport, in my mind, was it a big disappointment? It was a huge disappointment and a huge hurt and a huge heartache.
Did you put any of that blame on Jordan? A lot of people say he kept you off the team. Obviously, as you said, he's never said that, but what's your thought?
See, I'm not that kind of guy. People say, well, Jordan did this, or Magic said, Magic did this, or whatever. But until I hear it from them, until they say they did it, right? And I respect them as champions. I respect them as grown men. And I don't think they're liars. I think if knowing Jordan and competing against Magic them the way I've competed against them, and we were all pretty brash when we were young, wasn't nobody holding their tongue. So if Jordan had said that, I think he would be man enough to own that. And the fact that he hasn't said that, I'm not going to believe what other people are saying. Well, Jordan didn't want him on the team. Now that's the narrative out there. And if he didn't say it, right, or if he didn't do it, right, just think how cruel that is to Michael Jordan to blame that on him, right? When maybe he didn't have anything to do with it. I am not going to do that, nor have I ever done that.
You were Dennis Rodman, as you mentioned, one of the teammates on your championship teams. He went to the Bulls, won championships. What was it like for you to watch? He's very different with y'all than he ended up with the Bulls. And even before that, with the Spurs, he kind of had some issues. What was it like for you to kind of watch his progression or regression, however people want to define it, over his career as he left you guys?
So I was happy for him to see him winning in terms of basketball. I was sad and hurt for him to see what he was doing in terms of drinking. And and I'm not talking about any of the other marketing stuff that he was doing, because I thought that was brilliant. But in terms of him turning
So a lot of that stuff was marketing, you like with the hair, the dress.
Yeah, I thought that was brilliant. I mean, it's like, hey, he was averaging 17 rebounds and making $800,000. He was averaging 17 rebounds and put on a wedding dress and some lipstick, and they gave him $17 million. I'm gonna say that again. 800,000 and then 17 million. All he put on some lipstick and he put on a wedding dress. $17 million later. I'm saying that was brilliant. That was brilliant, right? What hurt me was the alcohol abuse that I was seeing that was happening. When they were talking about how Dennis could drink all night and then get up and play, to me, that was hurtful and saying, wait a minute, something's wrong with that. That's not cool. Something is wrong that this guy is drinking like, because the Dennis Rodman that I knew, the marketing genius Dennis never smoked, never drank, never touched anything. I mean, his body was a temple, right? And to see the alcohol abuse that was taking place, and no one kind of trying to speak to that hurt me.
Wow. I know you got to go, but quickly, just a one-word answer, first thing that comes to your mind. Best player of all time.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Best point guard of all time.
Magic Johnson.
I thought you were going to say Isiah Thomas.
Well, I'm gonna put myself, second, because Magic could do some things at his size in terms of rebounding that I couldn't do, and then he played with Kareem. So now, if you give me Kareem,
it might be different.
You give me Kareem and he take Lambeer, I think I may win a little bit more.
Best player in the world right now.
I'm gonna have to still say LeBron James. What LeBron James is doing right now, and we'll look back over years from now and we'll go, wow. But, and I'm gonna say this whole generation, because, and I know I gotta go, but I'm gonna stay for a little bit more because this is important. I think this generation is not getting enough credit for what they're doing, because the athletes, Chris, that are in this generation are so far superior than what was in my generation. Jordan by far was the best athlete that we had ever seen, and he could do something, from an athletic standpoint. And I ain't talking about basketball playing, just from an athletic standpoint. There are like 10, 11 guys in the NBA right now with Jordan's athleticism.
Right.
Okay, we didn't have that back then. So when you look at a Kevin Durant, when you look at a Steph Curry, like you've had some comments about Steph Curry and Chris, I've said to you, I ain't never disagreeing with you on where you put Steph Curry, because where Steph has done and what he's doing, to me, is similar to what I was doing against Jordan and Kareem and Magic. Steph beating KD, Steph beating LeBron, and I know how hard it is to do that when we're this size and we don't jump 40 inches and we ain't got all this crazy, 7 feet handle and all this stuff. When you the little guy and you got a jump shot and you smart, then you got to figure out a way to beat all that other stuff. And Steph Curry is doing that and has done that. So I got big respect for Steph. But what KD and what LeBron is doing, man, when you put them in, if you put them back in the era of the 80s with their talent, their athleticism and their skill, and they're the best athletes of that generation like Jordan is, who's the GOAT?
You
know what I'm saying?
They would have looked like mutants. I mean, they would have looked like mutants in that day.
Man, you put KD in the 80s.
Yeah.
Put LeBron in the 80s.
You remember Ralph Sampson? Now, he wasn't as skilled as KD, but he would want to play outside, and people said he was soft and, what's he doing and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, last question. Player today who most reminds you of yourself?
I would say Kyrie Irving with his ball handling skills. He's really freaky with that ball, man. And I had ball handling skills like that. And if I played in today's game with the freedom that they allow you to play with, I would probably be that type of ball handling skill player, one-on-one kind of guy.
Well, we're going to close with this just for people that may not have known. I had always said Isiah Thomas is the best small player below the rim of all time. And I did recently put Steph ahead of you, and you were nicer here than in private talking to me about putting Steph ahead of you.
Well, yeah, and the reason why I said that is because you wasn't taking into account, right, of the Kareems, the Magics, the Birds, and now I never said like me and Steph shouldn't be on the same. I actually said to you, I'm honored to be compared with Steph, because what Steph can do that I can't, like that boy, he can shoot it from way, way, way out there and shoot it good. But at the same time, what Steph and I have in common is we were beating the freak athletes. Okay, we were beating the giants, and I got big respect for him for that. Now, the only thing that I was saying to you that I'll say here, the game today, it favors the point guards and the small players. The era that I won in, the rules were geared toward the bigger players. And this reminds me of a conversation I had. I didn't have this conversation. I overheard this conversation. Wilt Chamberlain was having a conversation with Michael Jordan about who's the GOAT at that time. And at that time, everyone was saying Wilt was the GOAT. And then they started having, Jordan as the GOAT. And I'll never forget, Wilt said this. And it's at the 50 greatest thing when we joined in Cleveland. Wilt said this to Jordan. He said, the difference between me and you, he said, they had to change the rules for me so I couldn't dominate. And this is Wilt Chamberlain speaking. He said, they changed the rules for you, Jordan, so you can dominate. And so what I'm saying about Steph and I, right, is that, hey, okay, they changed the rules so the small man can dominate, okay? The rules were not set up for me as a small person to dominate. And that's the difference.
No, that's great, man. And there are so many jewels. Like I said, it was basketball 101. You had great stories, man. This was outstanding. I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate you just being factual and honest.
Yep. All right, Zeke. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good day.
Yeah.